Loving Eliza by Ruth and Nordin, Chapter 19. 3 weeks later, when the photographer was due to come to town, Eliza took the time to put her hair up in a fashionable hairstyle. She even had on her best dark blue dress for the occasion. This would be permanent, something that she would always look back on and remember with great fondness, so she wanted to look her best. When she was happy with the way she looked, she left the bedroom to find John, who was sitting in a chair at the kitchen table with one of her books open. "Are you able to understand all of that?" she asked. He looked up from the book and shook his head. "Give it time. It'll come to you." She picked up a hat and put it on her head. She hoped it wouldn't mess up her hair. She decided that she wouldn't wear it when it came time for the photographer to take her and John's picture, but for now, it would have to do. She turned to her husband and smiled. "You're wearing the same clothes you had on when we met. It suits you very well. When I look at the picture, I'll always remember the first time we met. I thought you were annoying in some ways, but sweet in others." He raised an eyebrow at her. "Well, in some ways you were annoying," she explained. "You wouldn't leave me alone." She walked over to him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. "But that was also sweet. Thank you for not giving up on me." He softly kissed her before he stood up and retrieved his hat from the table. "I can't wait to see the picture when it's ready. Can you?" He shrugged. She sighed. "I guess pictures are a female thing. All right, I'm finally ready, and we're not even running behind. I did good today." Smiling, he followed her out of the house. On the way to town, she spent the time discussing how they might stand or sit for the picture. She always liked pictures. It was a picture that allowed her a tangible connection to her son, and now a picture would be the very thing to tell the world that she and John did live in this place. She had a hard time sitting still. For once, the trip to town seemed to take much too long. He seemed amused by her eagerness, but she didn't pay his teasing glances any mind. The fact remained that this was a perfect day. The day was cool enough to enjoy it, and the sun shone brightly. Yes, it was perfect. When John parked the wagon on the edge of town, she didn't have the patience to wait for him to help her. By the time he reached her side, she was already on the ground. She adjusted her dress and took his elbow. "Maybe we should see what Addie and Frank are up to before we leave. What do you think?" He nodded. It wasn't hard to find where the photographer was. In front of the general store was a line of people waiting for their pictures to be taken, and the photographer was busy setting up his equipment. Eliza and John took their spot in line. "It looks like the whole town came out for this," she told John. "Well, at least mostly everyone." She didn't see Harriet Lube anywhere, and that was a relief. She figured that she would have to run into the grouchy woman at some point, but she was more than happy to delay that event. However, she did see Troy there. He sat across the street talking to 2 men. He glanced their way, and she quickly looked away from him. She hadn't spoken to him since that night of Charity's dinner. In church, she and John sat on the other side of the room, and Troy had left them alone. Still, she couldn't shrug off her unease whenever she did see him. She felt that she should apologize for leaving him as abruptly as she had, but she didn't know how to do that. It was much too awkward. "Good morning, John. Good morning, Eliza," a woman called out. They turned and saw Alan Gray and Bethany Grooms behind them. Eliza blinked in surprise. "Why, Alan, you're out in public." He chuckled. "I've been known to get out once in a while. I don't hide in my room all the time." "Oh, I know," she said, "but you did keep yourself a lot." "That's before we met," Bethany said. "Actually, I should thank you for introducing us," Alan added. "We've decided to marry come spring." "No kidding?" Eliza asked. "We would marry today, but we don't want to rush it," Bethany stated. "Well, that's great," Eliza said. "Isn't that great, John?" John nodded. Eliza grinned. "I'm happy for you both. Now Alan can start living life instead of reading about it." Alan laughed. "I do still read." "Just not as often," Bethany added. Marshall Custer ran over to them, interrupting their conversation. "Oh, good. I'm glad you're in town," he told John. "I need you to fix a broken step in my house. I was going to go out and get you, but since you're here, would you mind doing it now?" John glanced at the photographer and then at Eliza. "I'll talk to the photographer so he'll take your picture first," the marshal said. John nodded, and they followed Ralph over to the photographer, who held a dry plate in his hand. "Corbin," Ralph called out, getting the photographer's attention. "I'm the marshal here in town, and I have something that needs fixing in my house. Now, this man John here is the only one qualified to fix it. I was wondering if I could move him and Eliza to the front of the line so that he can tend to my home." Corbin gave her a good look. "Eliza, that's your name?" Eliza shifted from one foot to the other, unsure of why the question unsettled her. "Yes." Corbin smiled. "I thought you looked familiar." Eliza's eyes grew wide. No, it couldn't be. Not this far out west, in this small town. "I'll be happy to take your picture," Corbin said. "I'm just about ready. Why don't you two go on over there? John, you sit in that chair, and Eliza, you stand beside him and put your hand on his shoulder." Eliza numbly followed John to the platform with a light green curtain behind it. She took a deep breath to settle the panic rising in her chest. Corbin wouldn't come out and tell anyone how he knew her, would he? Despite her slight trembling, she managed to stand beside John and set a hand on his shoulder. John glanced at her, obviously sensing that something wasn't right. She forced a smile. "I've never had a picture taken before." Her voice shook. She hadn't meant for it to, but it really couldn't be helped. A part of her past was behind that camera, and could easily announce what she used to be to the entire town. "Let's just go home as soon as you're done with that step. We can come back another day to see Addie." His gaze shifted from her to the photographer, and then back to her. She knew the question in his eyes. Had Corbin been one of her customers? She hated answering it, but she knew she had to. "Yes, he's from Omaha." "I need you two to look at the camera," Corbin shouted out. She forced her eyes to the camera. All she could do was act as if nothing was wrong. Maybe everything would be fine. There was no reason to panic. She focused on her breathing and counted silently. Her hands steadied, and she was able to give a slight smile when Corbin counted backwards from 3 to 1. After he took the picture, he called out, "I'll have it ready by tomorrow morning." She breathed a sigh of relief as the next couple with 2 children were ushered forward. She gladly stepped down from the platform. One look over her shoulder told her that Corbin had turned his attention to the next people in line. Maybe that was it. Maybe there was nothing to worry about after all. The marshal walked over to them. "Will you come over and fix that step now?" he asked John. Eliza was aware that John glanced in her direction, but she couldn't make eye contact with him. Even if he knew what she'd been and what she'd done, she just couldn't look at him at the moment. For him to see one of those men she'd been intimate with wasn't something she relished. She hoped that she would never come across any of those men ever again. She didn't know what else to do except sit in one of the few vacant chairs in front of the general store. She didn't feel like seeing Addie or talking to anyone. She just wanted to wait for John and then go home. After John left with Ralph, she settled into the chair and put her face in her hands. She couldn't come back here tomorrow and face Corbin again. She just couldn't. All she wanted was for the past to stay buried in the past. Why did he have to come to town and stir up old memories? Why couldn't the past just stay there? Maybe she could have Frank or Addie pick up her picture tomorrow. Then she could avoid coming back here while Corbin was still in town. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling vulnerable. She wished that she had brought that picture of her son, but she hadn't. Glancing up at the crowd, she watched Corbin as he took another picture, acting as if nothing was wrong. Well, maybe for him nothing was wrong. He, after all, had only seen her as a prostitute, and who knew how many of those he'd seen in his lifetime. Maybe it made no difference that she was there. And all he'd said was hi. He hadn't been rude. If he had wanted to come out and tell everyone what she'd been, he would have already done it, wouldn't he? Another family moved to the platform and assembled to get their picture taken. Corbin told them how to stand. She watched the process for a while. The line moved slowly. Not once did Corbin look in her direction. That was a good sign, wasn't it? Maybe he would leave her alone. Maybe she worried over nothing. She stood for a moment and peered into the general store to check the clock. She'd been there for a full 15 minutes. Sitting back down, she slowly exhaled. John had to fix one step. Once he was done, he would be back and they could go home. Surely he was almost done by now. "I never did congratulate you," a familiar voice said. Jerking, she turned to see Troy, who was now sitting next to her. She placed her hand over her heart. "I didn't see you come over here." "Apparently not," he said. Great. It wasn't bad enough that Corbin was within viewing range, but she had to contend with Troy as well. Shifting into the chair, she cleared her throat and said, "I never did apologize for leaving the way I did at Charity's. When I was heading out of the house, I ran into John and—" She hesitated, knowing that whatever she said, it would not come out right. Men never handled rejection well, at least not in her experience. "I mean, it was just a dinner we were going to. We weren't courting or anything. And even if they were, she'd had every right to marry John anyway. She'd been under no obligation to marry Troy, ever." Troy leaned back in his chair. "You don't have to explain anything to me. You loved him all along. You should be with him." Right. She didn't believe him. The nagging feeling that was there, that was telling her something was bad about him, was screaming at her. "Thank you," she finally said, deciding it was best to act as if he meant it. "I see you two got your picture taken," he said. "Yes." Now she had to look for an excuse to get out of here. She scanned the crowd of people who mingled around the business district. There really wasn't anyone that she felt comfortable going up to and starting a conversation with. She glanced at the doorway and saw that Frank was helping a customer. When was John going to come back? "I figured that you two got one of those silver frames," Troy continued. "Our mother gave Erin one for each of her sons, even John. None of us thought he would ever get married at the time, but he sure showed us." Eliza frowned, not particularly caring for the way he laughed. "Well, he almost married Daphne." "I know," Troy said. "Everyone knows. If Daphne had shown up first, then John would have married her when you came into town." She blinked at the bitter edge in his words. "But things worked out for the best," he continued, his eyes sharp even as he smiled. "Good old Willie has a reason to smile again. Those two are going to do very well together." That was it. Eliza didn't care if Frank was with the customer or not. She had to get away from Troy. She quickly got to her feet. "I just remembered something that I had to get from the store. It was real nice seeing you again, Troy." She didn't wait for him to respond. As soon as she was in the store, she wiped her hands on her dress, hoping to dry them. She shouldn't break out into a sweat just because she talked to someone. But what was it about Troy that bothered her? Was it always going to be like this? She hated it. Hated having Corbin out there taking pictures, knowing exactly what she used to be. Hated having Troy lingering around, thinking that she duped him. She never should have agreed to go to that stupid party with him. If she hadn't been so hungry, she wouldn't have. But it was better than sleeping with Alan so he would give her money for the restaurant, wasn't it? She squeezed her eyes shut tight, willing the tears away. This was supposed to be a good day. She and John were getting their picture taken. It was supposed to be perfect. So why was it quickly turning sour? And how could she get things back to the way they should be? "Eliza, are you all right?" She opened her eyes and looked at Frank's concerned expression. "Oh, hello, Frank. She glanced around the store. What could she use back home? Corbin entered the store. "Oh, good. Do you have a screwdriver?" he asked Frank. "I got a loose screw out there." She took a deep breath, wishing she could fade into the background or slip out. She glanced out the window and noticed that Troy was still sitting by the door. Gritting her teeth, she wondered if there was a door out back that she could go through. Was there an alley behind the store? Frank turned to his counter and pulled out a drawer beneath his cash register. "I have one in here somewhere," he told Corbin. Corbin nodded and then smiled at her. "It sure is nice to see a familiar face. I do a lot of traveling, so I rarely get a chance to meet up with someone twice." "You know Eliza?" Frank asked. "We had some business a couple of times." Eliza was going to throw up. She just knew he was going to tell Frank what kind of business they had. Another glance out the window showed her that Troy hadn't budged from the spot. She couldn't decide what was worse, Both Troy and Corbin were dangerous, but just for different reasons. "Found it," Frank called out. "Thank you." Corbin took the screwdriver and left. She breathed a sigh of relief. He hadn't told Frank. She didn't know why, but he was being quiet about the whole thing. Maybe he understood that she wanted out of that business and needed a second chance to do it. Whatever the reason, she wasn't going to let the opportunity slip by. "Oh, I better find John. We should head back home," she told Frank. "Will you tell Abby hi and that I'll see her next time I come into town?" "Are you sure that's all you want?" Frank asked. "I do have a lot of goodies on the shelves," he hinted with a wide grin. "Well, you're quite the salesman, Frank. We'll spend our money here next time we're in town, I promise." "Well, I'll hold you to that." She couldn't help but smile. "Frank, can you come out here? We need help with the platform." One look out the door notified her that the platform had fallen over. "Well, I better assist," Frank said. "Frank, do you have a door that leads to an alley?" she quietly asked. He stepped closer to her and whispered, "Trying to avoid Troy?" "How did you know?" "Addie." "Yes," she said. "As a matter of fact, I am trying to avoid him." He nodded. "Back down that small hallway in the back room. The door's there." "Thank you, Frank." "Any time." She slipped out the door that he mentioned and breathed in the fresh air. She was alone in the alley, and she had never felt so good to get away from people in her entire life. She turned in the direction that would lead to Charity's house and made her way down the dirty alley, careful to lift the hem of her dress. She reached the end of the row of businesses and stepped onto the dusty road. Squinting in the sunlight, John would be 3 blocks away. She strolled along, thinking of how odd it was that things were so quiet in this section of town. But she figured all the activity was in the center part of it. When she approached Harriet Lube's house, her stomach tensed and she paused. Did she dare even walk in front of the woman's residence? Harriet rarely looked out of her windows. Maybe she could just quickly pass by unnoticed. That was the curse of living in a small town. Everyone knew everyone else, and when something bad happened, it made future dealings a very unpleasant experience. "I thought you might be down this way." Eliza gasped and rolled around. Corbin sauntered over to her, looking as if he didn't have a care in the world. "It sure is good to see you again, honey." "I'm not your honey," she replied. "Not all the time, just when I pay you to be." She took a deep breath to settle her nerves. Please, Mr. She realized that she didn't even know his last name. But what did it matter? "I don't want any trouble." "I don't want any trouble either," he said. "Why do you think I kept my mouth shut back there? However, I have been looking for a moment to speak with you. Alone?" "I'm married," she blurted out. "I don't do that anymore." He chuckled. "Married? You? A prostitute?" "Well, I'm not a prostitute anymore. I came here to leave that life behind." He stopped laughing. "Well, that's a shame. I saw you and hoped that we could..." He shrugged. "Well, you know, in a town this size, it's not like there's exactly, a place to go to for that kind of thing." "No, there's not," she said. "Very well. I'll just have to wait until I get to a town that does. Sorry to disturb you, Eliza." Was that it? Was he really going to leave it at that? She tried to think back to what she'd learned about him over the years, but there had been so many men who had come her way. It was hard to remember who was who. All she could remember was his face. She sighed. She hoped that he was one of the nicer ones. She turned around and nearly ran into Harriet, who had a satisfied smirk on her face. "Interesting," Harriet said as she scanned her from head to toe. "A prostitute, huh?" "Mrs. Lube," Eliza began, "I'd appreciate it if you didn't say anything." "I bet." Eliza struggled on how to handle the woman. In her time of working for her, Mrs. Lube hadn't proven to be a rational woman. "I worked hard to get out of that life," Eliza explained. "You certainly did," Harriet Lube said. "You took your feminine wiles and married that poor retard who didn't know any better." Something in Eliza snapped. "Now you listen here, you tired old hag. It's one thing for you to point the finger at what I used to do, but when you talk about my husband that way, it's the final straw. I have put up with you long enough. You promised me money for my work, and yet you cheated me out of a good $4 because you didn't earn it. I did so earn it. I went without food, and you sat there and ate right in front of me, knowing how hungry I was and refusing to have enough compassion to let me even have a scrap of food from your table. You even fed that stray dog that makes its rounds to your place once a day, but you couldn't spare anything for me. And it looks to me like someone who'd give her body in order to make a living is beneath a dog. The only man who'd have you is one who can't tell the difference. Eliza slapped her. The woman pressed her hand to her cheek, looking horrified. I warned you not to speak about John that way, Eliza said. Harriet threw down her cane and screamed. Startled, Eliza stepped back, not sure of how to react. The stupid woman was a loon through and through. She's beating me! Make her stop! Harriet screamed. Why, you... Eliza pulled on the woman's hair. I've had enough of you, you witch! Now shut up! She's hurting me! She let go of the woman and retrieved the cane. You want this? Then stop your hollering! What's the meaning of this? A man called out. Great. A group of people came running to see what the ruckus was all about. I ought to hit you with this, Eliza hissed. Harriet glared at her. I would expect no less from a whore. Eliza's hand tightened around the club, but this time her actions were out of anxiety instead of anger. Well, please don't tell them. I'm sorry. I won't do anything else to upset you ever again. Well, then I guess you'll have to keep coming to my house and working for me. My silence will be payment enough, don't you agree? Eliza winced. Could she afford to make such a deal? Sooner or later, she would do something or say something to upset the woman, and the woman would end up revealing her secret anyway. Eliza knew people like Harriet all too well. Be a good girl, her uncle once whispered in her ear. As long as you don't tell anyone our little secret, I won't let your aunt get rid of you. But when she got pregnant, he quickly forgot that promise. No, she couldn't afford to make a pact. There was no honor among liars, and sooner or later, Harriet would grow tired of her and tell the town anyway. Eliza was tired of living in fear. Eliza handed the cane back to Harriet as the people reached them. No, Mrs. Lube, we are not in agreement. I will never be your slave again. The crowd gathered around them. She recognized a few of them, but most of the people had turned back to whatever they had been already doing. The ones that remained were all just a bunch of busybodies who had absolutely nothing better to do than to mind other people's business. Every town had them, and every town had a Harriet Lube who patiently waited for the right moment to strike a deal, only to turn the tables at the most inopportune time. In that case, Harriet began, turning to the crowd, I suppose these nice, moral people might like to know what kind of woman they have in their midst. Is that what you want? The people, naturally, were curious. Why wouldn't they be? They could taste the sweetness of gossip when its fruit was ripe. Eliza was tired of fighting. All of her life, she'd hidden. She either hid from herself or from someone else, but she'd always been hiding something. What was it that her father once told her? The truth shall set you free? I'll save you the trouble, she told Harriet. Looking at the crowd and ignoring her pounding heart, she said, Before I came here, I was a prostitute. I didn't want to be one, but I was 14, and my uncle sold me into the profession. I came here for a clean start, but I guess there are some things that one can never run from, no matter how hard they try. Her gaze shifted from Harriet's startled look to John, who had finally shown up, a little too late. She felt numb as she moved forward. As if on cue, the crowd parted for her. She didn't dare look at any of them in the eye. As long as she could keep her focus on what was in front of her, she would make progress. Somehow, she would rise above this. She was a survivor. She'd always survived, and she wasn't about to stop now. She stopped in front of John and finally looked up at him. Of all the people there, he was the only one who could devastate her if he turned his back on her. Tears came to her eyes as he put his arm around her and led her down the road, away from the people, away from the whispers, and away from the stairs. For once, she was glad that he always parked on the edge of town.